Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast launch workshop. My name is Eric K. Johnson. I am the podcast talent coach. Over the next 60 to 90 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what it takes to launch a successful podcast. I'm going to give you all of the steps that you need to take to launch your podcast. In addition to that, I'm going to tell you a lot of things many of the podcast gurus miss and why a lot of podcasts fail and go away after just a few episodes. So I can help you overcome those obstacles and those hurdles and make sure that you're well on your way to launching a successful podcast. So I appreciate y'all being here. What I'd love to do is kind of figure out who's joining us today. So in the chat, if you could type in where you're from and what you're considering starting a podcast on. What would your podcast topic be? If you could put that in the chat, that way I kind of know who I'm talking to and how to tailor the information we're sharing today to make sure that it works specifically for you. So over in the chat, just tell me where you're from, and then tell me where you are, what your podcast topic would be if you were to launch a podcast today. Scott's from Florida, considering pushing gratitude. I love that, Scott. That is a great topic. Joe's North Georgia, no, North Georgia mountains. He wants to start a podcast on real estate. Thanks for sharing that, Joe. Colleen is in Northwest Nevada. We Be the Change. That's a great title. I love that. I want to be the guru of gratitude. That is a noble cause there, Scott. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that as well. Post up where you're from, letting everybody just kind of pop in here today. Got quite a few people joining us, and just want to make sure we're getting everybody in and getting themselves settled in. So I appreciate y'all being here and joining us today. Over the next 60 to 90 minutes, I'm going to give you the steps to launch your podcast so you know exactly what to do. A lot of times we go to these workshops and we're filled with a lot of empty content. You walk away going, well, there was 60 minutes I'm never going to get back. I want to give you the exact steps you can take to launch your podcast. That's why we're calling this a workshop instead of some other training. You're actually going to get the steps. Stay all the way to the end with me. I'm going to give you this free guide I've created. It's 75 ways to drive engagement with your podcast. But a little tip on this here. You can use these engagement tips on any sort of content you're creating, whether it's a YouTube channel or Facebook, social media, whatever you're looking to create engagement. I'll set you up with this guide here at the end. So as we go through this today, well, all I ask is that you turn off your distractions. Give me your undivided attention here over the next 60 to 90 minutes. Grab a pen and paper. I'm going to give you some nuances, a lot of information you're going to want to jot down as we go along. I'm going to give you resources that you're going to want to go get as you launch your podcast. And ultimately, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to launch your show. And then I'll give you an opportunity to get my help to walk you step by step, every step of the way through the process to launch your podcast. Sound good? We're all up for that? All right, let's rock and roll. The first thing I want to do is make sure that you have the worksheet. So I emailed this out last night. It's the podcast launch worksheet. I'm going to put that link to that in the chat here so you can download that. Get this little worksheet. This is a great place for you to take notes as I give you the resources that you're going to want to grab. You can write that down on here as well. If you've already downloaded it in the email that I sent out last night, the first part on here is why do you want a podcast? When we talk about launching a podcast, that foundation and why you want to do it is so critical because that is what will give you the motivation to get in and do the work each and every week to launch an episode. So many people get bogged down because of the work it takes to launch and publish a successful podcast, and they just give up. My goal today is to show you a streamlined process to create your podcast quickly and easily every week. But I also want you to have a deep desire to launch the podcast. So in the chat, what I'd like you to do is share the reason you want a podcast. I have a podcast. It's called Podcast Talent Coach. And the reason that I have my podcast is because I want to help people create powerful relationships with their audience because I think the world needs more relationships. I was watching my son play on his Xbox. He was in high school and he's got his headset on and he's chatting with his buddies. And his buddies live in Washington State, in Minnesota, and up in Canada. We live in Nebraska. And all of his buddies are nowhere close to him. He doesn't have really strong relationships with his friends. And I've realized that technology has really sucked the relationships out of society. And it really kind of breaks my heart because when I was a kid, I knew everybody that lived in our neighborhood. The guy that owned the gas station down the street lived right up the street from us. You know, now you go to the gas station, you don't even see anybody. You pay at the pump, you drive in, you drive out. There's no relationships at all. And it's my goal to help the world have more relationships. And that's why I do my podcast each and every week. And that's what drives me to get in and publish content every week. So in the chat, I'd love to know why you want a podcast. What is it you're hoping to get out of this particular workshop? And why do you want to launch your podcast out into the world? John says helping men build relationships with other Christian men and an outreach to men and building disciples. That's a perfect example of a really powerful why and why you want to have a podcast in the first place. You have a message to share. You want to leave your impact on the world. You want to increase your significance in the world, right? You want to have some influence and authority in your niche. Joe wants to share my knowledge of real estate to provide value to my viewers, building my brand and expanding my reach. Yeah, absolutely. You want to help other real estate agents be successful. Colleen says to connect people who long for change with people who are change makers to help bring along or bring about needed change in our world. That's fantastic. It's a strong, solid why like that that is going to help you really create a successful podcast. And when so many people teach you how to launch a podcast, they teach you the steps you need to go through about how to record and export, how to get it on Apple and all that. I'm going to show you that today. But what I want you to understand is that there's so much more than that when it comes to launching a successful podcast. And it all begins with your why. You have to have a strong why and build that solid foundation for your podcast in order to create a successful podcast. Because getting more clients, impacting more people isn't about a podcast. Today's workshop is going to be about launching a podcast, but it's not about podcasting. It's about who you are on the podcast. It's about who you're going to be when you share your message with the world. When you're trying to grow your business and leave your impact on the world, people make decisions emotionally, and then they justify those decisions logically. Everybody will tell you they make decisions logically. Everybody will tell you when they make decisions, it's all about logic. But when you really start peeling back the onion, you'll realize they all make decisions emotionally. When they bought the car, they fell in love with the car, and then they justify why they needed the car. Like they didn't really need the car, they wanted the car. When you buy that new set of golf clubs or that new purse, you know, you buy it emotionally, but then you justify it. Like, well, my old clubs, you know, I broke that 5-iron last weekend, so I really need a new set. No, you just need a new 5-iron, but you're emotionally invested in that new set of clubs. And when you can stir emotion on your podcast and really connect with people, that's what it comes about. It's about who you're being on the podcast. When I share my screen with this, Jeff, I can see you on my screen. Are you seeing just one slide or are you seeing two slides? Give me a thumbs up if you just see one slide. Jeffrey Humes, One slide or two slides? Do you see one or two on my screen? Joe, you're seeing two? Joe's seeing two. All right, here, I'm going to do this. Um, I'm going to switch screens. I got two screens here and they get goofy on me. All right, so now I'm going to do this and go here. I just want you to see the one slide so you're not getting distracted. All right, Joe, one slide or two. I feel like I'm the eye doctor. One or two. One, two, one, two. You can go to the eye doctor. All right, Joe, thanks. Uh, on our podcast, it's about building trust. We talk about the sales process and how people do business with those they know, like, and trust. It's about building rapport, really, right? It's about building that relationship with your customer. Think about the last time you made a big purchase. That might be a car or a computer or your house, right? You probably reached out to your friends and acquaintances. Hey, anybody know a good real estate agent, right? You know a good lawyer, you know a good plumber, because you want a reference, right? You want somebody that you can trust. You don't want to take your car to the mechanic and have them, take you for a ride. No pun intended, but you want somebody that you can trust. And so having that recommendation from a friend helps build that trust. Well, when they're listening to your podcast every week and you're sharing yourself on there and you're sharing your story and your journey, you're building that trust. And that trust all comes through self-revelation. The more that I reveal about myself, the more you get to know who I am and what I'm all about, how I tick, what I believe, what I value. Self-revelation is the way that friendships are built. If you think of your best friend, you probably know everything there is to know about your best friend, not because you were there every step of the way, but you know everything about your best friend because your best friend told you every story, right? They've told you everything they've gone through and they've been through. And so when you reveal things about yourself on your podcast and tell your story, your origin story, where you came from, and it shows people what you believe in and what you value, they get to know, like, and trust you. You build that rapport with them. And that is so critical when you're trying to create a movement or you're trying to encourage people to do something. You're trying to leave that mark on the world because you want them to trust in you, and that gets them to take action. I read this amazing book here by Marcus Sheridan. It's called They Ask, You Answer. And in this book, Marcus shows some studies that say when people are making a buying decision, they're typically 70% through their research before they ever reach out to a company to have a conversation. They've done 70% of their research before they even reach out to have a conversation with you. So if you're waiting to build the relationship until they pick up the phone and call, or they submit your form, or they send you an email, you're way behind the eight ball. But when you have a podcast and you're building that relationship with them week after week after week, and they get to know who you are as they're doing their research on that purchase, you're already building the relationship with them. Now, when they reach out to you, you're the one they think of because you have the relationship, you're top of mind. And now you already have some rapport. When they reach out, you're part of their research. I didn't just fall upon all of this. I've been in radio for the past 35 years. This year was my very first radio gig. I worked in this little Quonset hut. There was 4 rooms in this little Quonset hut. If you counted the bathroom as a room, the transmitter was actually in the studio with me, which is highly unusual. But this was where my radio career started. I grew up in this little house. My single mom raised my brother and I in this house, and she taught me the honor of the hustle and really doing whatever it took to make ends meet and put food on the table. I eventually went here to the University of Nebraska to study architecture. And as I was getting my architecture degree, I started falling out of love with architecture and started falling into love with radio and everything that radio could do. We were in the studio behind a microphone, talking to people we can't see, and just encouraging them to take action, right? We were building an audience and gathering attention. And that took me here to this very first radio job. And I just fell in love with radio. But I was so close to getting my architecture degree. I finished the degree in architecture, and then I stayed in radio for 35 years, not only on the air, building audiences myself, but I was also coaching others to do the same thing. I started as a program director. I was overseeing all of the content on the radio stations, including the people on the station, all of the contests, the music, everything you heard between the records. I've gone on to interview amazing people like George Strait and Ice-T, Zach Brown, Lady Gaga. It has been amazing the number of people that I've been able um, to interview. I started doing overnights. So I'd work midnight to 6 for 2.5 years. I struggled doing overnights, just trying to learn the art of attracting attention and building an audience. And then that led to becoming the PD. Then I become the senior vice president of programming, and I was overseeing multiple radio stations. It grew to 64 radio stations across 14 different cities as I continued to build these successful radio stations. But more importantly, I was building personalities. I was building influencers. I was building people on the air, teaching them how to move a crowd. And I was able to grow these audiences and bring them in and motivate the audience to take action. When I get on stage in front of a concert like this, in front of 15,000 people, and they would cheer because they would listen to me on the radio, they felt like they knew me. And I would run into people all the time and they would say, Eric, I know we've never met, but I feel like I know you because I listen to you every day on the radio. That's the power of having a podcast. They feel like they know you because they listen to you every day. They know the name of your cat. They know where you grew up. They know the struggles that you've been through to get to where you are today. And that's the power of having a podcast. We were able to raise hundreds of thousands of bottles of water for the Open Door mission. We were able to put on concerts for our audiences. This here is Old Dominion in the middle, surrounded by folks from our sponsor, Woodhouse Ford, and with people from the food bank of the Heartland. We put on a concert to raise money for a food bank for the Heartland. That concert raised $1,014,527 for a food bank for the Heartland because we had relationships with people and we could encourage those people to take action. Because I was able to get attention from the audience, I would have companies pay me to endorse their products. Wendy's would pay me to endorse their products to my audience. Twizzlers, Cox Communications. I was able to get on stage. I was the dean of podcasting for 48 Days Eagles. I was on stage at New Media Expo and Podcast Movement. I was on the Trailblazers Summit. I am co-host of the podcast review show with Dave Jackson over at the School of Podcasting, all because I built relationships with people. I had influence over my audience, and I was able to have that authority and significance by having a podcast and having that conversation with them every single week. I'm up to about 500 episodes now. 533, I think, was just published because I'm creating that relationship with my audience. And that's what a podcast can do for you. I'm going to show you the steps to how to launch a podcast, but more importantly, it's the why behind it and the power that you can create when you launch a podcast. It is so amazing what you're able to do when you launch the podcast. And that's what I want for you. All right. When you are in the sales process, this is on your worksheet, by the way. So on your worksheet, you'll see this little upside down or this little funnel here. So there are 4 steps in the sales process. First is building rapport. All right. We kind of have to decide if you and I like each other before we're going to do business with each other. Have you ever like gone to buy something like furniture and you're like, man, that salesman just kind of rubs me the wrong way. I'm not sure we really want to do business with here. I'm not sure I can trust him. Right. That you want to build rapport with your audience just to get them comfortable to do business with you. Second step is qualifying your prospect, making sure that you're right for them and they're right for you. Will my solution help you? And are you somebody I really want to work with? So we qualify each other. The next step is educating them on your solution. So we like each other. I know I can help you. You know I can help you. Now I need to educate you on what the solution looks like. And then finally, closing the sale. Everybody treats these four steps equally, unfortunately. A lot of people rush straight to the educate. Let me tell you about the course I have. Let me tell you about the solution I have. Let me sell you this car before ever realizing um, what it is I need in a car. I went to a car lot one year. I was looking for a vehicle, and he said, "What do you want to spend?" And I go, "Probably 15 or 20 grand. Like I'm just looking for a nice used vehicle, something I can get around in." And so we were walking through the car lot, and I saw a really nice car, and I said, uh, "What's the price tag on that?" And he goes, "Oh, that's out of your price range. That's too much for you. You can't afford that one." And I was like, I didn't say I couldn't afford it. All I said is I'm looking for 15 to 20. Now, if that one was a good deal, I might have bought that car, but the guy didn't even stop to show me because he didn't do enough qualifying with me to understand what it is I could afford. What I can afford and what I was looking to spend are two totally different things. So make sure that you spend time building rapport and qualifying your prospect. Needless to say, I didn't buy the car from that car lot. I went somewhere else. So these aren't equal. Each of these steps are a little different. 40% of the sales process is building rapport. Do I like you? Do you like me? 30% of the sales process is qualifying your prospect, making sure that my solution will work for you and making sure that you are right for my solution. So we qualify each other. Once we're there, then I can show you what my solution is and educate you on how it works. And then the last part is closing the sale. That's only 10%. Because if I've done the first 90% right, the 10% closing should just be a formality because we've already decided we like each other, we're right for each other, and here's how the system works. Now it's just a matter of getting you started. Don't rush too fast to the educate and close. Build rapport. The interesting thing about this funnel, if you look back at the They Ask You Answer book that we just looked at, 70% of their research is done before they ever reach out to you. 70% is the rapport and qualify part. They reach out to you so you can educate them on their solution. But the magic is your podcast does all of this. Your podcast builds rapport with your audience. If you spend enough time building rapport and not simply providing information, people come to your podcast to be entertained. They want companionship. They don't want content. Your podcast is not about content, it's about context. Your podcast is not about content, it's about context. You want to wrap your 6 steps to success or whatever it is you're teaching around different context and different story each and every episode so people fall in love with you and what you have to offer and they're right there every step of the way with you. And so when you consider that 70%, you're building the rapport and they're self-qualifying themselves by listening to you every week and they want more of what you have because they're falling in love with you and who you are. It's not about a podcast, it's about who you're being on the podcast. Another one of my favorite books is this one here by Chet Holmes. It's called The Ultimate Sales Machine. Chet says, in any given market, only about 3% of the market is buying today. 3% out actively looking for a solution. That means 97% aren't in the buying market today. If all you're doing is selling, you're missing 90% of the market. This is also in the worksheet. There are 5 levels to your market. 3% are buying now. 7% could be convinced to buy now. They might say, oh, Melissa, I wasn't in the market for that, but now that you mention it, I could use one of those widgets. 30%, they need it, but they don't need it today. You may be selling lawnmowers. Well, my lawnmower works just fine, but it's on its last leg. It can probably get through this summer, but next summer I'm going to need a lawnmower. So I need your lawnmower. I just don't need it right now. So I'm not in the market to buy a lawnmower today. 30% don't think they need what you have based on the information they have. You may be selling mattresses and you say, hey, Kimberly, do you need a mattress? And Kimberly says, nope, I'm good. You say, how old's your mattress? Oh, it's about 12 years old. We bought it when we built the house. You say, did you realize that mattresses wear out after 7 years? And even though you think it's still good, it's actually worn out and it's causing your back pain that you're waking up with every morning. And then Kimberly says, I didn't realize that. She needed more information to realize that she's actually in the market for what you're selling. They need more information. And then 30% are never interested unless something changes in their world. So maybe you're selling Toyotas and Scott's wife works for Ford. Scott's probably not buying your Toyota because he's getting a really good deal over at Ford right now. So he's not interested. Now, if she leaves her job at Toyota and she goes and works for IBM, now maybe Scott's in the market for your vehicle because his situation has changed. The benefit of having a podcast is you're not just selling to the 3%, you're building a relationship with all 100% so that when they're ready, they think of you. They're coming to you for that need. You stay top of mind. So the not now people, you're building a relationship with them here over the next year. So when they're ready for that lawnmower next summer, you're the one they think of. When you're working with people that just need more information, you're giving them examples and helping them overcome their challenges on your podcast so that when they're ready to buy, you're the one that they think of. You stay top of mind. You create that top of mind awareness that is so important. And when you do, it allows you to attract your ideal clients rather than having to go out and chase them down. Because everybody's selling to the 3%. When you're talking to all 100%, all of a sudden, when they're ready to buy, they're attracted to you because you've built that relationship with them. They think of you. Here's a couple examples of it. This is Ann Sullivan. Ann is a harp teacher. She lives in Pittsburgh. She played with the Philharmonic there and is amazing. And she would teach harp to people at her house. They would come over and she would teach them harp. Well, one day, COVID hit, and that wasn't possible anymore. So Anne had to do something different. She decided to go online and teach harp online, but she needed a way to reach her audience so they would come to her. How could she reach people in Atlanta and in Nashville and in Phoenix and in Italy and teach them harp as well? She launched her podcast in 30 days, like I'm going to teach you here. And all of a sudden, she had people all over the world reaching out to learn harp. Anne has now pivoted. She employs other harp teachers to teach for her in various places throughout the world. And Anne creates a great podcast about playing harp. She gets to talk about harp. She demonstrates a few lessons on her show. And when people come to her for teaching, she employs all of these other teachers to teach it. And her business has done incredibly well since then because it's gone from being just Pittsburgh to now being worldwide. Tavana Denise came to me. Tavana was a nurse. She got out of nursing to become an entrepreneur. And as soon as she did, she had all of these other nurses coming to her going, how did you escape? How did you do it? Please show me how. Because nursing is such a incredibly difficult industry and it was sucking the life out of Tavana. She knew she had to do something different. And as soon as she did, everybody else wanted some of that too. So she started this little roundtable where she would bring women in to discover how to launch their next thing. And she would talk to them at the roundtable, and the roundtable then would offer people coaching with Tavana, and Tavana would coach them to launch their next thing. So she wanted it to be bigger. We launched her podcast in 30 days. She started promoting her roundtable. Her roundtable started becoming incredibly successful, and she would take people from the roundtable into a group coaching and mastermind opportunity with her, and her business took off like crazy. Now she helps nurses launch their next thing. And it's amazing what a podcast can do when you are building those relationships. Can you see how this is going to play into what you're doing? When we go back and we talk about your why, can you understand, can you see how a podcast and building these relationships really help you uh, lean into that why and really help you um, show people what's possible and leave your mark on the world, increase your significance and help you have some impact? When you have that powerful, solid why, it's such an amazing way to create relationships with people. It's not simply about your content, it's about the context that you put into it. And it's an amazing way to help you do it. So my question to you is, are you leveraging your content to its fullest potential to build those relationships? That's what a podcast can do for you. It's not about your content, it's about your context, and the podcast can help you do that. So on your worksheet, you have a diagram which has these 5 boxes. These 5 steps are the 5 steps that you're going to take to launch your podcast. The first step is your foundation. All right. Your foundation is a lot of the why we just talked about. This is one of the steps that many podcast experts miss when they teach you how to launch a podcast. They work on steps 2 through 5. Step 1 is so critical because this is the foundation upon which you build your podcast. You need this step in order to make sure your podcast has longevity. You need to define your why. You need to define your target, your topic. What is it you're going to talk about? Then we need to define your target listener. Who are you trying to reach? One of the struggles that we're going to get into here in a little bit is being able to find listeners. A lot of people give up because their audience doesn't grow fast enough because they haven't spent time on their foundation to decide exactly who they're trying to reach. Your foundation also includes developing your show name, developing your graphics, and your podcast style. Well, is it going to be an interview style show or a solo show? What's your style going to be on the podcast? That builds the foundation of your show and really helps you understand what we're trying to do with it. Once you do that, we need to record your show. All right. So you need to dedicate production time so you can get in and do it every week. You need to develop a process so it doesn't eat up your entire week. You need some equipment. Let me give you a link here. A lot of people think that you need to spend a whole bunch of money buying equipment, and that's not the case at all. This microphone that I'm using here is about a $70 microphone. You don't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a microphone. You really need 3 pieces of equipment to create a podcast. You need a microphone, you need a pair of headphones, and you need a computer. That's it. Chances are you probably have 2 of the 3 laying around the house now. I'm going to put a really long link here in the chat for you to an Amazon. You don't have to buy this. I'm not an affiliate of this. This is just an example. But this here is the Samson Q2U black handheld microphone. It's just like this microphone I'm using right here. This one's an Audio Technica. They don't make this microphone anymore. This Samson is very similar to the one I'm using. So for this whole package for $89.99 US, you can get this microphone, the windscreen, which keeps your P's from popping and the plosives from attacking the microphone. So you'll need that. And then you get this boom arm, which just attaches to your desk. And you get the cables to hook it up to your computer. The important thing is this is a USB microphone right here, USB, which means it plugs directly into the USB port in your computer. All right. Don't go out and spend $300-$400 on a microphone. That's not necessary. All right. This one here is a really good microphone. If you fall in love with podcasting and you decide, you know what, this is the thing I want to do for years and years to come, then go look at spending a ton of money on a podcast microphone. But the trick that very few people tell you is that the microphone isn't what makes you sound great. It's the quality of your room. If you have the right room, you're going to sound great regardless of the microphone. If you have a bad room, a $300 microphone isn't going to help you. So get a great microphone, get a great room, and you're going to be great. All right. So you need a microphone, you need your computer, and you need headphones. So if you're interviewing anybody, you're not getting feedback through the speakers of your computer. You're going to record. Oh, you know what? I should share that with you too. Let me share one more thing. I'm going to share. Um, it's called Audacity. Audacity is the uh, Audacity is the program that you'll use to record and edit your audio. Audacity's free, and you can download it from the Audacity website. A lot of podcasters use Audacity. It's super easy. Editing your podcast is easy, and we'll get to that in a minute. So you're going to need Audacity to record solo episodes. If you're going to record interviews, I just recommend doing it on Zoom. A lot of podcast snobs will tell you the audio quality of Zoom isn't nearly as good as StreamYard or Riverside or whatever. We're not creating masterpieces here. We're creating podcasts, right? And only superhuman hearing can hear the difference between Zoom and Riverside audio. Again, your room's probably not going to be good enough to create that kind of quality audio. Don't worry about the minimal difference between it. Everybody knows how to use Zoom. Using Riverside and StreamYard takes a little bit of learning curve. So use what everybody knows and record on Zoom. If you're going to do interviews, if you're doing solo, just use Audacity. Makes it super easy. So we have our episode recorded. Now we need to edit it. That's step 3 is edit. Editing is just like editing a Word document. You use all the same commands. You use copy, paste, delete, all of those commands that you use in a Word document, you'll use in Audacity. Makes it super easy. Once you've got it edited down, and don't worry about taking out all the ums and uhs. You don't need to do all of that. Nobody's listening for that anyways. Don't waste your time. That's what takes up so much time of all these other people that give up because they keep trying to make it perfect. Don't sterilize your audio. Just edit it, make it nice and clean. Once it's edited, you need to export it as an MP3. All right. You export, Audacity will want to export it as a WAV file. WAV files are 10 times bigger than MP3s. And if you can export a Word document as a PDF or save it, then you can export it as an MP3. It's super easy. Once you have your MP3 saved on your computer, now we need to upload it. And we don't upload it into Apple and Spotify and all of those. We upload it into an audio host. And an audio host is like a storage unit for your audio. You put it all into the audio host, and then you tell all of the podcast players the address of your audio host so they can ingest it. I'm going to put a link here to Libsyn. Now, I am an affiliate of Libsyn. Libsyn is an audio host, Libsyn, Libsyn.com. If you use the coupon code PTC, you can get your first month for free. And Libsyn is fairly inexpensive. You can get a beginner account on Libsyn for $7 a month. It goes up to $40 if you're doing like a daily podcast and a ton of audio and you want a lot of bells and whistles. You could probably get by with $7 to $15 a month for your particular podcast. There are other audio hosts. I would be careful for free hosts. There are hosts out there that say, we'll host your podcast for free. The problem is you get what you pay for. And so if you're hosting on a free audio host and they happen to go under because it's really hard to make money when you're giving stuff away for free, your podcast goes away too. A lot of times they are difficult if you want to move from one audio host to another. Free doesn't make it easy for you to move. Sometimes they own your RSS feed. And so if you want to move, they're not giving you the RSS feed. So just make sure that you understand what comes with your audio host. If you're not going to use Libsyn, I like Libsyn because Libsyn, their support is fantastic and it makes it super easy to upload it. So when you upload your audio to Libsyn, now it's ready to be distributed to the world and you're ready to go. So in Libsyn, it gives you opportunities to link your podcast right in Libsyn to everybody else. So you can go in there and link it to iHeartRadio and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Samsung and all these other podcast players. And so it gets distributed to the world. We link that up, that distribution step, we link it with what's called an RSS feed. And it's just a matter of copying a URL from Libsyn and giving it to all of the other podcast players. We do that one time, and then you don't have to do that ever again. Now, every time you upload a new episode, it automatically gets ingested into all the podcast players. You only have to link it when you first launch your podcast. And now every week, all you do are these middle three. You record, you edit, you upload, and that's it. And it goes out to all of the podcast players. It's a one-time thing. But then once you're done with that, now it's time to promote the podcast. A lot of podcast gurus forget that step. They say, okay, now you're out to the world. If you build it and they will come, only happens in the movies. It doesn't happen with your podcast. You need to get out and promote it and tell people about it and bring them to it. Because once you've done these 5 steps, then it leads to significance, because you're building an audience, you're getting the audience to fall in love with you, and you're building those relationships so you can move a crowd. So many podcast gurus stop at the distribute step, and they don't help you create significance because they didn't build the foundation properly, and they're not helping you promote it so you can become that influential authority in your niche. There are 5 steps to launch the podcast, but that 6th step of significance is so important because that's what makes your podcast successful. That's what gets people to come to you week after week and learn what it is you have to offer. Unfortunately, there's a term in podcasting called pod fading. Pod fading is where a podcast just fades away. And in the industry, it's said that many podcasts fade away after 7 episodes. And I thought that was absolutely crazy, that a podcast would just go away after 7 episodes. I was on a coaching call with one of my clients, and we were looking for podcasts for her to go get interviewed on so she could grow her audience. And she's in the caregiving space. So she helps women who are in that sandwich generation. They're taking care of their elderly parents, but they're also taking care of their kids. She helps those women because she has gone through it. So we're looking for other caregiver podcasts for her to be on. And every other podcast that I clicked on had gone away. Last published in 2019, last published in 2021, last published in 2015. Like they stopped. There was like 19 episodes and never heard from again. 7 episodes. Now, there was one that had 1 episode and then no more after that. And they just fade away. And we're going to get into why podcasts fade away and how you can avoid those challenges so I can make sure you don't fade away. We're going to do that in a minute. But first, I want to give you an opportunity to quickly and easily launch your podcast. Just think about how long you've been trying to launch a podcast. In the chat, I want you to put in there how long you've been thinking about launching a podcast. I've been thinking about launching a podcast for 15 minutes since I got your email. 2 years, Kimberly says. That's a great example. I get all sorts of answers when I ask this question. How long have you been considering launching a podcast? 1.5 years, 10 years, Jeffrey says, 3 months. When I asked this question, the last time I did this workshops, I was getting these answers, 2 years, 10 years, 3 months. And then one guy said about 1.5 weeks. And I was like, well, there's a guy that takes action. I like that. 2 months, 4 years at least, about 10 years off and on. Exactly. There's a lot of times we want to do things and we have that desire to get it done. But the challenge that we run into is that there's nobody helping us get there and there's no accountability. You always think, yeah, you know what? I'm going to launch my podcast someday. But unfortunately, someday never comes because there's always something that's getting in the way and preventing you from doing it. But when you do it with a community, when you do it with a buddy, it makes it so much easier to get to that finish line. It's like going to the gym. If you have to go to the gym by yourself, you're like, I don't want to go to the gym. But if you got a buddy that's calling you and saying, hey, I'm meeting you at the gym today, now you got to go because your buddy's expecting you there, right? It's that community around you that's giving you the support and holding you accountable to take the steps so that you launch. But a lot of people don't know where to start. Like, how do I even get started? What's the first thing I need to do? And that's what I want to help you with. It's what's called my podcast launch accelerator. The 6 steps to launching a podcast is your purpose, your program, and your platform. That's the foundation that we talked about. Creating those 3 pieces, your purpose is your why, your program is your topic, and your platform is the container that we're putting it in. Are you doing a solo episode or a co-hosted show, interview style show? That's your platform. Once we create that, then we produce our show. So it's recording and editing. We publish it. We upload it to our host and distribute it to the platforms. And then we get out and we promote it. It's the Podcast Launch Accelerator program. And that's what I'd love to invite you to come join me in today so I can take you and walk you every step of the way to launch your podcast. By the end of Podcast Launch Accelerator, you're going to have your podcast published to the world. We will get it distributed on Apple and Spotify and Stitcher and all the rest of them. You're going to lay the foundation to be known as an influencer in your niche. We're going to start building those powerful, profitable relationships we've been talking about today. And more importantly, we're going to free up your time. I'm going to show you how to do it quickly and easily so you're not spending your entire week trying to figure it out, searching outdated YouTube videos, trying to figure out how to launch the podcast. It's a 4-week program. So in 30 days, your podcast will be up and running. I teach it live. We'll do 5 live group launch training sessions where I teach you step by step every piece of the way. So there's no guessing. You just follow the steps that I give you each and every week. And by the end of the 4 weeks, your podcast is up and running live. I record all of these sessions and you get lifetime access to the recordings, both audio and video. So if you ever need to come back, maybe you want to launch a second podcast or you need to brush up on how to connect your podcast to your audio host, you can come back and watch the recordings anytime you'd like. You get lifetime access to all of those recordings. You get a full online toolkit. This is a toolkit of resources that I've built over my 35 years in radio. It's everything from how to properly prepare for your show, how to ask great interview questions, how to edit, how to review your own show. There's 36 different resources in this online toolkit that I've developed over my years in radio and over my dozen years of helping podcasters. And you get access to this full toolkit as well. And you get lifetime access to it in the program. You'll also get a private Podcast Launch Accelerator Facebook group that you can jump into in between our calls. This is a great spot for you to get your questions answered between our calls and have access to me instead of waiting for our call next week. You get a one-on-one call with me so I can ensure that your podcast plan is solid and you're going in your right directions. Maybe I can answer some questions for you that you didn't feel comfortable asking on the group call. I can jump in and answer those questions for you in our one-on-one call. And then you get lifetime access to all future calls, versions, and updates. So anytime I teach the program again live, you're welcome to come to it. Absolutely no charge. You get lifetime access as an alumnus of the Podcast Launch Accelerator. So you can come back through the program and catch up on the calls anytime you'd like. Maybe it didn't launch quite the way you wanted to the first time. Maybe you want to launch a different podcast or a second podcast. Come on through the program. You have lifetime access to all the future calls. The total value is about $5,700. Enrollment in the Podcast Launch Accelerator is usually $997, but I want to make it super easy for you today to get enrolled and launch your podcast in 30 days. So I have a few bonuses for you. The first one is my powerful and unique podcast interviews course. This is a course that I've created. It's a video course you go through on your own at your own pace. It's up on my website, sells for $197. I interview people like Jason Derulo and Miranda Lambert about what it's like to be interviewed and what makes a great interview. I teach you all of my strategies of how I've interviewed amazing people like Taylor Swift. It's been an incredible journey, and I share all of my secrets with you in this powerful interview course. You get a free ticket to Audience Explosion Blueprint. It's my event where I teach you how to grow your audience. It sells for $197. You get a ticket to that at no charge, so I can help you grow your audience. And then one more additional bonus for you. When the program's over and Audience Explosion Blueprint is done, I'm giving you an additional one-on-one call with me so I can help you design your next steps. Where do you go from here, and how do you implement your podcast to be as successful as it can be? People pay me $250 for an hour one-on-one with me. I'm giving it to you just to make sure that your podcast is launched successfully. So that takes the total value of everything up to $6,300. And enrollment, like I mentioned, is $997. But today, because you're here and I really want to see you build more relationships, I told you at the beginning, my goal is to help put more relationships back into society, because I think technology has sucked them out of society, and I want to see you launch. So instead of $997, today you can enroll in Podcast Launch Accelerator for $497. For $497, I will take your hand, walk you every step of the way, and in 30 days, you will have a podcast launched to the world, and you will be ready to roll. All right. You can enroll at podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA. You can see all the details that I just showed you right over there on the page, and you're able to get enrolled for $497. I'm going to give you a guarantee because I want to make sure that you launch. The guarantee that I'm giving you is called my guaranteed to launch guarantee. If you get to the end of the 30 days and you are not launched, something threw you sideways and you didn't get launched, I will personally work with you until you get your podcast launched. I will help you overcome any challenge that you face to make sure your podcast is up and running, published, and launched to the world so you can make your impact. Podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA is where you can enroll. It's $497. I would love to see you there. The classes begin next Thursday, March 6th at this same time, 5 p.m. Central Time, and we'll do it over the next 4 weeks. And by the end of that 4 weeks, you will have your podcast launched to the world. Let me give you a little taste of what you get. So in week 1, we develop your purpose in your program. This is what most podcast experts miss. We understand your why. We get really deep on why you want the podcast in the first place. We look at your calendar. We allocate your production time. We define your style, your podcast style and personality, who you're going to be so people can fall in love with you. We define your topic, and then we define your target listener. So we build that solid foundation in week 1. In week 2, we name your show, we create your graphics, we get your hosting account over on Libsyn, make sure you have the equipment set up. I teach you how to hook up the equipment if you're running into any challenges there. We talk about your process so it doesn't eat up the entire week. We make sure it's streamlined for you. And in week 2, we actually record an episode. So then in week 3, we can talk about editing the episode and finalizing it, how we export it as an MP3. This is the week that a lot of people get tripped up on because they're not really sure how to edit. Do I need to put an intro on the front? Can I add music to it? How do I do that? So we spend a lot of time on week 3 wrapping up loose ends and really getting the show perfect so it's exported and ready to go. In week 4, make any final edits that we need. We add the open and close to it, and we post the show to your audio host and your website. So then your podcast is up and running. We get it linked to all of the platforms, and you're live into the world by the end of week 4. After that, we go into Audience Explosion Blueprint. That's the event where I'm going to teach you the other 3 Ps, how to profit, how to promote, and how to build those powerful relationships. We do that at the Audience Explosion Blueprint event so that you can get out, find your audience, and bring them back to you and use that podcast to help you grow your business. So we start a week from today, next Thursday, March 6th. Enrollment is $497, and you can enroll at podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA. So before we jump into pod fading, Let me jump over here real quick. I'm going to put that link in the chat for you so it's easy for you to click on. Put it right there. There's the link. And so you can jump in there. So Amia asks, is this audio only podcast? I will show you how to create your video. I recommend people record on video and then use the audio podcast to put on Apple Podcasts, use the video for YouTube. And we touch a little bit on that in the Podcast Launch Accelerator as well. Everything I teach you in Podcast Launch Accelerator can be used for video. Video is not technically a podcast to me, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Podcasts you subscribe to through an RSS feed, which you don't through YouTube. But I'll get into that in a little bit here, and we can discuss that a little bit more. But let me talk to you about pod fading and how to ensure that your podcast doesn't just fade away. This is what kills most podcasts. There are three big reasons that podcasts really fade away. The first is that the host finds out it's more work than they thought it would be because they don't have a step-by-step process put into place that can help them quickly and easily create a podcast episode each and every week. And they finish producing one episode only to start creating the next episode. And unfortunately, it feels like all they're doing is podcasting. They have no process and they're focused too much on their content and not enough on the foundation. They don't have that really solid foundation built of their purpose, their program, and their platform. It's the podcast is unfortunately built on them built on their content and not around them. What I want to help you do is build a podcast that's centered around your why and centered around who you are so that we can build a process to quickly and easily produce your episode each and every week. The second reason podcasts fade away is that the podcast doesn't grow as fast as the host thought it would because they have no promotional strategy to get out and grow an audience. When it comes to growing your audience, there are two sides of the equation. One, you need to go get people who don't know you and invite them into your world. And the other side of the equation is you need to keep your current listeners coming back week after week after week. And most people aren't fulfilling both sides of the equation. In the Audience Explosion Blueprint event, we go through this entire process and set up a promotion strategy for you so that you can grow your audience and attract your ideal clients. That's what Audience Explosion Blueprint is all about. And you get that for free going through the Podcast Launch Accelerator. And then the final reason that podcasts fade away is that the podcast doesn't generate revenue as fast as they thought it would because they have no business system in place. A lot of people want to build a large audience and then go sell ads to that audience in hopes to make money. Unfortunately, only about 7% of all podcasts are large enough to sell advertising. The other 93% of us have to generate revenue in some other way, but people are chasing the advertising dollar. There are multiple ways to create money with your podcast through relationships. You can demonstrate your authority on the podcast each and every week, let people know exactly the transformation you offer and invite them into your world. You can demonstrate your coaching by interviewing current clients and showing them showing your listeners the transformation that you offer. You can demonstrate your products. You can answer questions and demonstrate your expertise that way. You can interview prospective clients or current clients to keep them coming back for more. You can interview partners who can get you in front of their audience and you can swap stages with them. They can interview you, you can interview them, you can get in front of their audience to grow your audience and build more relationships. You can interview peers, you can interview mentors. There are many, many ways to use your podcast to build relationships. But when it all comes down to growing your business with your podcast, leaving your impact on the world and increasing your significance, it's about building your podcast in the right way. Because it's not about the podcast, it's about who you're being on the podcast. It's about that relationship you're building. You don't want a podcast just to have a podcast. You want to have a podcast to leave your mark on the world. And unfortunately, the people who are teaching you how to podcast come out of the tech world and they're just teaching you the technical aspects of launching a podcast instead of teaching you what it takes to become an influencer in your niche, what it takes to become a respected authority and someone of significance in order to be able to move a crowd. It's not about your content, it's about the context that we're wrapping your content around. And that's what I want to show you how to do in the podcast launch accelerator. And you can join me today. I'd love to see you next week when we kick off the course. Again, that link is podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA. I want to open it up for questions. If you have any questions, post those up in the chat, and I'd be more than happy to answer any of those for you in the last few minutes that we have today. Let me see if I have any other questions. Do you recommend all the podcast team members to take the course or just a single member? AD, you can have all of the people on the podcast take the course. I would highly recommend all of them come to Audience Explosion Blueprint at least. If there's just going to be one of you doing the recording and editing and the technical work of it, then really only one person needs to come to all 4 classes. Everybody should be there on the first one when we talk about your why and we talk about your ideal target listener, and you should all do that homework together in that first week. But when we get into recording and editing and distributing, everybody on the podcast doesn't need to be in those sessions, just the person that's going to be doing that work. But that's a great question. I don't have any problem with that. Any other questions that you have, post those up in the chat. I'd love to answer those for you. One of the questions I get quite often is, how long should my podcast be? There's no such thing as too long, only too boring. So when you launch a podcast, don't be so concerned with how long it is. What I want you to be concerned with is making sure that it's a consistent length, because it really doesn't matter if your podcast is 15 minutes or 55 minutes. As long as it's entertaining, the momentum keeps moving forward and you're keeping people engaged. And what I teach you is how to create content that isn't just information, it's engaging entertainment. People come to your podcast because they want to be entertained. They listen to podcasts because they want companionship. They don't want to do whatever it is they're doing by themselves. They don't want to mow the yard by themselves, so they're listening to their podcast. They don't want to ride a bike or exercise by themselves, so they listen to a podcast. Your podcast cannot be just your content. It has to be you, has to be your story, has to be your personality. And that's what I help you develop in the podcast launch accelerators. I help you develop who you're going to be on the podcast, because the podcast itself isn't going to be enough. That's why podcasts fade away. A study was done of the top 200 podcasts in Apple Podcasts, and it showed 50% of all the podcasts in the top 200 were longer than an hour, 50% were shorter than an hour. The length isn't as critical as the consistency. People are creatures of habit, and they want to know what to expect. So if you're going to do a half-hour podcast, your podcast should be roughly a half hour every week, because they want to know how it fits into their lives. They say, you know what, my workout's a 30-minute workout. I can listen to Brenda's podcast while I work out, and it fits perfectly. If one week it's 15 minutes and the next week it's an hour and a half, they don't know how your podcast fits into their life, and therefore they can't make it a habit. So I recommend that don't worry so much about the length as the consistency. All right. I appreciate that. Let's see. Other questions. Edna says the total value is $63.79 and the enrollment's $497. So total is $68. No, not at all, Edna. The value is $63. If you were to buy all the parts separately, it would be $6,300, but it's not all separately. I sell it all in a package, and so you get the whole thing for $497. All right. It's valued at much more than that. If you were just to buy an hour of coaching with me, it's $250 for the hour. You can get that over on my website. I'm throwing that in so you get all of it on top of each other for one price, 497. Good question. But thanks for the clarification there. Jesse says, what do you do about sound quality when you live in a noisy area? It's not necessarily what's going on outside your house, it's what's going on in the room. You want to record in a room that has soft surfaces. Like you don't want to record in a den that has a hardwood floor and really hard walls, or a big open space, because then it will sound echoey. Uh, the best place ever to record is actually a walk-in closet, because it's so. Have you ever walked into your walk-in closet and the noise just deadens because you have all those soft surfaces around you? So there's ways to make your room not as noisy. Put some soft surfaces up. Make sure there's a rug or carpet on the floor, that sort of thing. In Podcast Launch Accelerator, we'll go through the specifics of how to deaden your room and make it so it doesn't bounce around. But if you have the right room, people could be mowing outside of your house and you wouldn't even hear it. You just need to make sure the room is the right room. And we go through a lot of that in Podcast Launch Accelerator. Great question. How often should I publish a podcast is a question I often get. I prefer a weekly podcast. People are creatures of habit, and we're in a weekly sort of tendency in our lives. We go to church every week. We go to the grocery store once a week. We do things once a week. And so I highly recommend being weekly so people get in the habit of listening to your show every Saturday when they go ride their bike, or every Wednesday night on their drive to pick up the kids from soccer. Like, get them in the habit of listening same time every week. Some people try to do a daily show. That's way too much work and more than you can bite off. You don't have the time in the day typically to do a daily show, so don't try that. And if you do less than once a week, people forget about you, and it's hard to build a relationship if you're not showing up every week. Think of it as like the card game that you go to, or game night with your friends. You go every Thursday night, you go play bunco with the ladies. Then you want to be there every Thursday, because that's how you build the relationship. Play golf with the guys every Saturday morning. Podcast is right there. Be that weekly habit. Build that habit in your audience. All right, I'll give you one more shot. Any more last questions? I'd love to see you come join me in Podcast Launch Accelerator. I'll put the link in the chat one more time. $497. Our classes do start next Thursday, 5 p.m. Central Time. We'll go for 4 weeks, and you'll have your podcast launch. It is super easy, super quick. I walk you through every step of the way. We do it live, so you can ask questions. If you get stuck on any part, I'm right there for you, and we'll get you through it. I'd love to have each and every one of you come join me. If you have any questions, feel free to email me before then. Click the link there, register for $497. Bring your friends along, and let's make it happen. We start next Thursday. All right, so get yourself registered, and I can't wait to see you then. All right, thanks for being here. We will see y'all in the program next Thursday. Have a great night.